This is commonly said that muscles take 48 to 72 hours to recover from a workout. Of course, the duration of your recovery will be impacted by the training variables you use and not by related factors. However, based on how most people tend to train, it must be said that muscles recover within 48 to 72 hours, and therefore, we should wait that time before training again. Otherwise, we compromise the muscles and the strength gains. An interesting way to study this is to have one group of subjects perform their workouts with a 48 to 72-hour interval, while another group performs their workouts with a 24-hour interval, and then compare the strength and muscle gains between the two groups. Studies have done this. Let's briefly review them and then discuss their implications. Part 1. 24 hours versus 48 to 72 hours rest. This research, conducted in 2018 in Singapore, recruited 30 active men and assigned them to a 24-hour or 48 to 72-hour group. Both groups trained with these variables 3 times per week for 12 weeks. The 48 to 72-hour group completed 3 sessions with 48 to 72 hours of rest between them. The 24-hour group completed the 3 sessions with 24 hours of rest between them. Nutritional patterns were similar between both groups. Ultimately, maximum strength in 10 repetitions across a variety of exercises increased similarly between the two groups. Lean mass also increased comparatively between the two groups. Therefore, these results fail to show that it is essential to wait 48 to 72 hours before training a muscle again for strength and muscle adaptations. The second study is from 2016 outside Portugal, where 21 trained men were recruited and assigned to a 24-hour or 48 to 72-hour group. Both groups trained 3 days per week for 7 weeks. The 48 to 72-hour group completed 3 sessions with 48 to 72 hours of rest between them. The 24-hour group completed the 3 sessions with 24 hours of rest between them. Interestingly, neither group experienced measurable increases in lean body mass. I think this is probably due to the imprecision of measuring lean body mass as a measure of hypertrophy. If more accurate measures of hypertrophy were taken, an increase could hypothetically have been found. However, maximum strength gains in bench press and leg press were quite similar between the two groups. Interestingly, the effect slightly favored the 24-hour group, but the differences were not statistically significant and could have been merely the result of the 24-hour group having individuals with slightly better genetics, causing the slight average difference. Part 2. Training frequency science. Studies show that it is essential to wait 48 to 72 hours before training a muscle again. Performing 3 training sessions per week with 24 hours of rest produced comparable adaptations. Research on training frequency further supports the idea that you don't always need to wait 48 hours or more to train a muscle again. Some studies suggest that training a muscle 5 or more days per week can be perfectly fine for building muscles and strength. For example, this 2019 study recruited all male subjects to train the same exercises and the same total number of sets per week. But one group trained each muscle only once or twice a week, while one group trained each muscle 5 times a week. After 10 weeks, strength gains in squat, bench press, and row were not statistically different between the two groups, but the percentages for squat tended to favor the full-body training group. Interestingly, hypertrophy of elbow triceps and flexors and lateral vastus tended to be higher for the full-body training group. Part 3. Fatigue and recovery. It is logical to think that when we train, we want muscles to be fully recovered from previous sessions, but I wonder if training muscles under some degree of fatigue occasionally can be perfectly fine. Doing so is not enough to kill the stimulus, and recovery is not exacerbated. In fact, we have data showing that if you train a muscle when it is not fully recovered, it is not necessarily exacerbated. Both the studies detailed earlier in the 24-hour group, as they were training muscles on 3 consecutive days, were most likely training under some degree of fatigue, especially in the initial training weeks. I deliberately used the phrase "some degree of fatigue" in everything I just mentioned. Training under extreme fatigue, where the muscle can hardly contract and where you can barely move, probably wouldn't be worth it. There is another factor that is very important. I just said that the initial workouts for the 24-hour group were probably done under some degree of fatigue. In later training sessions, I really believe it is likely that the 24-hour group was fully recovering between their training sessions, meaning they were recovering in 24 hours. This is because your muscles have a superpower. Repeated struggle affects your body and produces a series of adaptations that essentially accelerate your recovery. These adaptations are collectively termed the repeated bout effect. I believe the repeated bout effect is greatly underestimated and undervalued. Our next video will dissect the signal that shows the power of the repeated bout effect and what that means for your training. Before we move on to the summary, keep in mind that all data presented in this video are averages. For some individuals, it could be possible that this information does not apply. At the end of the day, if you train a muscle with less than a 48-hour interval, it will eventually become apparent if you consistently struggle to recover and if your muscle and strength gains are lackluster. Some people may be wondering about the recovery of connective tissues, such as tendon and ligament injuries, which can arise due to the gradual accumulation of microdamage and tend to be due to a mismatch between damage and repair. Unfortunately, it is not clear how much resistance training can damage connective tissues such as tendons, how long repair time can be, and what training variables can impact this. Therefore, it is not very clear if training muscles with a 24-hour interval increases your likelihood of accumulating fatigue-related connective tissue damage. But remember, if you are doing something like high-frequency training, although the recovery time between sessions is shorter, performing defined lower numbers per session means less tension on the connective tissue per session. Also, it is likely that different tendons and ligaments throughout your body have different resistances to damage, and of course, some people have more resilience in tendons and ligaments compared to others. It is possible that regardless of how you load the train, it is necessary to dissipate fatigue damage with active tissues again. Although there do not seem to be cellular studies providing a clearer view, in any case, I intend to delve into this literature further, and there is future content out there on connective tissue and endurance. Part 4. Training Summary. We have data showing that, compared to waiting 48 to 72 hours to train a muscle again, waiting 24 hours does not kill high muscle or strength adaptations. Training frequency has also been documented as perfectly adequate for muscle hypertrophy and strength. Of course, it's perfectly fine for you to train a muscle 48 to 72 hours, or even further away again. Remember that the duration of your recovery will certainly be impacted by the training variables you use and not related to training factors. However, the goal of this video was to show that the scientific literature indicates that it is certainly possible for you to build a successful training program where you train muscles separately every 24 hours. Under the right conditions, why are we able to train a muscle every 24 hours? Also, your body can produce adaptations that accelerate your recovery. Our next video will detail the very interesting science behind this. Also, training under some degree of fatigue occasionally can be perfectly fine. The training stimulus is not completely dead, and we have data showing that if you train a muscle when it is not fully recovered, recovery is not exacerbated. In fact, I started a page on Patreon where I have an extra short video detailing this incredibly interesting research, in addition to covering an interesting study that shows us what can happen to muscles and strength if you are consistently training a muscle under extreme levels of fatigue. To continue to follow our valuable training and recovery tips, don't miss the chance to subscribe to our YouTube channel. There, you will have access to exclusive content, details on the latest studies, and practical tips to optimize your workout. Don't let this opportunity pass you by. Subscribe now and join our community committed to your fitness success.